In our last video, we talked about Greenland and NATO and whether Trump blowing up the old world order means the end of alliances or the start of something new. Today, we're back on the same map, but this time it's not charts and treaties. It's a woman in Minneapolis, an ICE officer with a gun, and a country quietly terrifying a lot of its own people. America has ICE, Canada just joined SAFE. SAFE is a €150 billion pot to help countries buy gear together, build up their own industry, and stop depending on the US for every plane and shell. And Canada didn't just clap politely from the sidelines, we actually joined. We're the first country outside Europe inside that framework.
And on top of all that, Prime Minister Carney is out there actually doing the work of de-risking our future in both defense and trade. Next week, he's getting on a plane to China. He's the first Canadian Prime Minister to do that in more than 8 years.
Yeah, he understands that we cannot hang our entire economy on a neighbor that's imposing crippling tariffs and calling us the 51st state every 10 seconds. So, besides all the deals and alliances he's shoring up, he has also floated tying auto production pledges to those big submarine purchases from South Korea and Germany. You want us to buy your high-end defense kit? That's great. Help us keep Canadians employed.
That's big stuff, and that's leverage. He's been making deals all year from Mexico to the UAE.
With Trump in charge of the USA, he's breaking down all of the norms. Not only has he stopped caring about international law, he stopped caring about restraint inside his own country. The country that used to call itself the leader of the free world. Because what happened in Minneapolis wasn't just a terrible tragedy, it was a signal.
A 37-year-old woman named Renee Nicole Good is dead. And the more we learn about Renee, the clearer it gets just how obscene the official story is. She wasn't some shadowy domestic terrorist. She was a mother of 3 who just moved to Minneapolis. She's a wife from Colorado who used to host a little podcast with her husband before he died as well.
Her parents described her as one of the kindest people they've ever known. Compassionate, forgiving, always taking care of others. Her dad said that she had a good life, but a hard life. That's who they killed. And even before the facts were sorted, Trump jumped online and said she was a terrorist with a car. No investigation, no pause, just straight to she was an enemy, it was justified, and the real problem is the radical left. May I ask, what is radical about the left wanting universal health care, equality, justice, and the basic right not to be gunned down because you're standing or driving in the wrong place? If that's what he calls radical, then the real problem isn't the left, it's him.
And the mayor of Minneapolis went on TV and called the official version nonsense and told ICE to get the out of our city. Dave and I cheered at the TV and said, this is finally the kind of language people should have been using back when Trump's followers were storming the Capitol in 2021. The time for polite, strongly worded letters and diplomacy left the building on January 6th.
And this is where it gets even darker, people. Everyone knows how many of the January 6th crowd have been pardoned, celebrated, and held up as heroes by MAGA. So when Americans see these ramped up raids, these big signing bonuses, and headlines about rushed hiring and thin training, they put 2 and 2 together. They look at ICE and think, this is where those guys go to get that badge.
And that's the perception. Out of shape bros in tactical gear, fired up on talk radio and weekend malicious fantasies, suddenly handed a gun, a truck, and a federal logo.
And remember, this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is the same White House that snatched Nicolas Maduro out of Caracas, announced it would oversee Venezuela's oil, bragged about keeping the oil and funneling the benefits into offshore accounts. They're literally stealing Venezuela's profits.
This is the same crew that openly talked about taking Greenland and Cuba and telling Colombia, you're next, and lecturing Mexico about getting its act together. They're not even hiding it. They said it to reporters on Air Force One and with a grin on their face like they were little boys who got a new toy truck for Christmas.
And if you think that we're exaggerating about the mindset behind all of this, you just listen to what Stephen Miller said on national TV. He told Jake Tapper, we live in the real world, and in his version of the real world, everything is governed by strength, governed by force, and governed by power since the beginning of time. That's how he framed it.
Then he took it even a step further and said the United States is in charge. We have the military. We set the terms and conditions. Complete embargo. We are a superpower. Other countries need our permission.
And then Tapper literally said, I don't even know what you're talking about right now. And honestly, same here. Because what Miller said is 19th century empire talk. It's the language of a country that thinks it runs Venezuela, runs Cuba, runs Colombia, and now runs the streets of Minneapolis and any other blue state that they don't like.
And this is where Canada should feel the chill right up our spine. Because Miller isn't just talking to Americans. He's sending a message to allies. The message is, we're the superpower, we call the shots. NATO, NORAD, CUSMA, treaties, contracts, all of that is optional. The Orange Law is power, written by a man who has bankrupted everything he's ever touched and now wants to treat the whole planet the same way.
Which brings us right back to SAFE and why it matters for Canada. Europe didn't build SAFE for fun. They built it because they can see Washington drifting into we do what we want, you deal with it territory. Canada joined because we know that if we're standing there alone when they decide what they want next, we are in big trouble.
And we're not going to be the last to join either. Japan has already said it wants in. Tokyo is pushing for full participation in SAFE because they can see the same storm coming that we can.
Australia is moving as well. Canberra just signed a formal security and defense partnership with the EU, and that deal covers defense industry, cyber, counterterrorism, maritime security, and is designed so that they can plug into Europe's defense money, including SAFE, and build kit together instead of just buying whatever Washington decides to sell them.
While Trump's team is bragging about iron laws and we're in charge, everyone else is quietly saying, fine, we'll back each other up then.
So on one side, you've got America hardening ICE and treating protests as domestic terrorism. On the other side, you've got Europe and Canada building a defense backbone that doesn't depend on Trump waking up in a good mood. The little guys are teaming up, and that's power.
And that's how you stand up to big bullies. You don't try to out-bully the bully. You get friends and you get organized, and you make sure that if somebody swings at one, they have to deal with all.
And that's been the story of Scandinavia for decades. Tiny countries living next to a nuclear-armed Russia, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, they didn't sit there shaking in the dark. They invested in their militaries, they built alliances, but they also invested in their people. Strong social programs, serious public health care, education, and support systems. They built countries worth defending.
And Canada can do the same thing. We can live next to an unstable, angry superpower and still be okay, but only if we stop pretending that hugs and nostalgia will protect us. We need to strengthen our forces, deepen our alliances, tighten our economy, and we absolutely have to refuse to create our own version of ICE or vigilantes.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Carney is doing something that absolutely drives conservatives up the wall. He's actually governing like they said they wanted to, and they hate him for it. They wanted someone to get serious about borders, so he did. They wanted somebody to talk pipelines. Well, he did that too. They wanted a crackdown on immigration, so he tightened immigration to the lowest levels in years.
He's trying to give conservatives what they always claim they want: security, investment, and predictability. And instead of saying thank you and let's work together, they're screaming the same old slogans. Freedom! F Trudeau!
And that's where the mask slips, right? Because it ruins their story that everything is on fire and only Maple MAGA can save us. The MAGA money machine that's pouring cash in from south of the border, they don't want a calm, boring, functional Canada. They make their fortunes off of rage, chaos, and instability.
It's clear that Trump takes his cues from Putin, and Maple MAGA takes their cues from Trump. It's the same pyramid every time. Down with democracy! And they'll reap the benefits. Ordinary people will get worse health care, weaker rights, and higher bills, while the same handful of investors, tech bros, and oil companies tell you it's all for your own good.
And next week, when Carney goes to China, that's going to drive them even more crazy because he's making progress and they just can't stand that. When our neighbor is openly threatening our economy, you don't beg them to be nicer. You diversify and you make sure that when they slam one door, you've already opened three others.
And that's really the heart of it all. Canada is choosing a different path, not just on trade and alliances, but on how we treat people inside our borders. We are a country that protects people when they're vulnerable.
But that's exactly what Maple MAGA wants to smash. They want to privatize Canadian healthcare and make it for profit. They want our institutions to be as scared as theirs. They want journalists, public servants, doctors, and teachers to look around and think, if I speak up, am I the next one with a federal badge at my door? And that's why this isn't just a Minneapolis story for us. It's a test. Are we going to look at what's happening in the States and roll over when our own version shows up? Or are we going to say, no, we learned from this. We're not going down that road.
Trump is doing exactly what Putin wants. Moscow wants NATO weakened. Putin wants America isolated and unstable. And Trump is delivering. He's wrecking the country that used to call itself the leader of the free world.
The good news is, that doesn't mean the rest of us are doomed. It just means that the rest of us have to step up. Scandinavia showed it can be done next to Russia. Canada can do it next to the US. We don't have to panic, but we do have to prepare.
And how do we do that? We strengthen the Arctic, we strengthen alliances, and we strengthen the safety net so people don't fall for every angry tweet promising to blow it all up.
So, to our American friends watching this, you're not crazy to be afraid. You're not overreacting. What you're living through is absolutely awful. You've got a government pointing guns at cars and calling it security, and calling anyone who objects an enemy. That's real. But you're not alone. The rest of us see you, and a lot of us are organizing our own countries so that we can push back from the outside.
And to our Canadian friends, this is not the time to get smug and point fingers and say, oh, thank goodness we're not them. No, this is the time to ask how easily it could happen here, and how do we make sure it doesn't?
We can choose ice, or we can choose safe. We can choose fear, or we can prepare and choose alliances, guardrails, and a country where standing on a sidewalk with a phone isn't an act of courage.
America is isolating itself. The rest of us are coming together. Trump can bankrupt his own country just like he bankrupted casinos and airlines. He can burn every bridge he touches. What he cannot do is make the rest of us follow him off that cliff. That's up to us.
Let us know in the comments because we want to hear from you. If you're in the US, what does safety look like to you right now? If you're in Canada or Europe, what's the one thing you think your country needs to strengthen before this decade is over? And if you haven't watched our Greenland and NATO video yet, well, we'll link it down below so that you can see how all of this connects to itself.
So make sure to subscribe, click on the bell, and check out our Substack or join the A-Team because all of these help us to keep pushing out these videos every day.
Yep, we watch and read the news so you don't have to. Because hey, it's getting harder every single day to tune in and see what country, city, or life Trump is ruining next.
Thanks for your support, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.